The nervous system. In this video, we'll be talking about the structures, functions, and pathways of the nervous system. Let's start with the structures and functions. The nervous system is composed of cells called neurons. Again, neurons are the cells that make up the tissues and organs in the nervous system. Neuron cells come together to form nerves, which is a tissue, and neurons also form your brain, which is an organ. So again, the structures are neurons, the cells, nerves, which are tissues, and your brain, which is an organ. The function of the nervous system is to, first off, receive stimulus from inside and outside the body, and then two, determine the body's response to the stimulus. Now, in general, the nervous system has a lot of jobs. It is an incredibly important system. I think we can break it down into two big categories of function. The first is within the body. Your nervous system regulates your body. It helps direct your body to move food through the system. It controls things like your heart and your breathing. In addition to that, your nervous system, your brain, controls your movement. Your brain sends the signal that moves your muscles. Finally, your nervous system is responsible for your thoughts, emotions, and dreams. All the things that make you a unique individual are in the nervous system. Now, the nervous system also has to respond to the environment, which is one of the 6 characteristics of life. In order to do that, one thing your nervous system has to do is sense the environment. It also needs to be able to respond to stimuli or things that are happening or changing in the environment. And finally, your nervous system needs to form and use memories. Now, I've referenced this idea of a stimulus and a response. So what are those? Well, a stimulus is any change in the environment that can cause an organism to react. So anything that is changing around us can become a stimulus. A response, on the other hand, is what an organism does to react to the stimulus. Let's see some examples. For example, let's say a bee comes into your environment. That is the stimulus. Seeing the bee is the stimulus. Your response might be to run away from the bee. Or perhaps your teacher asks you a question, right? The change in the environment is the teacher asking you the question, and your response might be to raise your hand. So something is changing the environment. Your nervous system is choosing the reaction to that stimulus. Now, how does your nervous system do this? Well, there's structures that are important in the nervous system. The first is that your nervous system has receptors. And receptors are neurons that sense a stimulus. So things like sight and hearing, taste, touch, and smell, all of those senses have receptors, which are neurons that receive and sort of process the stimulus. Your nervous system also is made of nerves, which are tissues that pass signals to the brain. And then the most important one is the brain itself, because that's the organ that processes all of the information from the receptors. The first picture you're looking at here is of a neuron. This is the cell that is the building block of the nervous system. Some of these neurons can sense the environment. Some of these neurons form together in nerves, and other neurons form your brain. But in general, this is the picture you'd see for a neuron. More specifically, you have special neurons that are receptors, for example, in your skin. You have neurons in your skin that can feel things like heat or pressure or stretch. Those neurons are responsible for sensing those stimuli. Then your body is also filled with nerves. In this picture, you're looking at the blue lines. The blue lines are numerous neurons forming together into a nerve, which is a tissue. Those blue lines are responsible for getting signals to your brain. And then also in this picture, you'll see in orange, your brain. That big lumpy gray thing about the size of your two fists that is responsible for processing all of the information coming from your body. So how does this work? How do we respond to stimulus? The first step is that a sensory receptor receives stimulus and turns it into an electrical signal. So, for example, your nose, in your nose you have sensory receptors, and those sensory receptors pick up a smell. Those receptors create an electrical signal. Now, what do they do with it? Well, they take that signal and they pass it to a nerve. Right? So the sensory receptor receives a stimulus, creates an electrical signal, and the electrical signal is then passed to a nerve, and the nerve passes that signal up to the brain. The brain can then choose between 3 different options, or all 3 options. Your brain can choose to form an action. Perhaps you move or you react. You can also have an emotion. Maybe the smell of something makes you feel happy, or maybe it makes you feel grossed out. And then they can also recall a memory. It can also form new memories. So let's say you smell something that reminds you of grandma, right? That chemical in the air traveled from a receptor to a nerve to your brain, and all of a sudden you bring back that memory of maybe grandma's cooking. Or maybe your brain will form a new memory. Here's another way of thinking about it. In this example, we're looking at the skin. In the skin, there are numerous different receptors, and we're going to be looking at the red receptor. So the red receptor in the skin would be a neuron. And let's say there's some pressure on the skin. You can see that by the red arrow pushing down. When the sensory neuron, when the receptor picks up that pressure, it creates an electrical signal. So the stimulus is the pressure, and the receptor turns that pressure into an electrical signal, and it passes that signal to the blue nerve. The blue nerve passes that signal up to the brain, and the brain can then choose what to do with that information. It might form an action, it might have an emotion, or you might have a memory either be created or remembered. Now, different receptors are responsible for different senses. There's more than just the 5 senses we all know about, but the 5 senses of sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, they're the big ones. So let's talk about those. Different senses have different receptors because receptors will respond to different stimulus. So one type of receptor is an electromagnetic receptor. These neurons respond to light. And naturally, they're in your eyeballs. On the back of your eyes, you have rods and cones, which are electromagnetic receptors. They respond to light coming into your eye, and they provide us the sense of sight. Thanks, electromagnetic receptors. We also have chemical receptors, and they respond to chemicals. We have these receptors both in our mouth, on our tongues, and in our nose. Chemicals in our food or in something we drink can cause a stimulus to those receptors in our mouth. When you smell something, that is chemicals in the air that are stimulating the receptors in your nose, and that gives us the sense of smell and taste. Finally, you have mechanical receptors. They respond to pressure, so pushing down. These are found in your skin and your ears. Now, the first one makes sense, right? Like I push on my skin, a receptor picks up the pressure, passes that to a nerve, goes to my brain. I know that my arm is being pushed on. But what about hearing? Nobody pushes on your ears to hear, except that they kind of do, because sound is just pressure going through the air. And so your ears hear the pressure in the air. So how does this look in the real world? Well, let's say this first scenario. You walk into 7-Eleven and smell the delicious scent of pizza. The question is, can you describe the pathway that the stimulus must take to get to your brain? Sure, let's go through it. In the beginning, your chemical receptors in your nose sense the pizza chemical molecules in the air. There's chemicals floating in 7-Eleven. Some of those chemicals are from the pizza, and your receptor can sense those chemicals. Those receptors then create an electrical signal, right? Your receptors are saying, oh, that's a pizza chemical. The receptors pass that signal to a nerve. The nerve passes the signal to the brain, and the brain chooses to do a few things. First off, your brain feels an emotion, happy, delicious pizza. And then it also remembers having pizza yesterday, so it's recalling a memory. Or what about this scenario, where you see a mosquito land on your arm? Again, same question. Can you describe the pathway that the stimulus must take to get to your brain? Well, the first thing is your electromagnetic receptors in your eyes need to see the mosquito. They are responding to the light bouncing off the mosquito. They create an electrical signal that is passed to your nerve. Your nerve passes that to your brain, and your brain, again, does a couple things. First off, it feels grossed out. It's an emotion. But then it also causes your arm to slap the mosquito, which is the action. So here's your big ideas. The nervous system is responsible for sensing and responding to the environment. It can do that because receptors are nerves that sense stimuli. Nerves pass signals to the brain. They are the connection between the receptors that can sense the world, right? If I have a receptor in my fingers, that information needs to get to my brain, and it does that by traveling through a nerve. And then the brain responds to stimuli by forming actions, memories, or emotions.